Hello, I am back. This is Eric Widman for our live immigration Q&A that we're doing weekly, and we have another set of really good questions to answer. So, first things first, we'll start it off with a general question. What are the main ways to immigrate to the USA? So, I like to tell potential clients there are three main ways to potentially immigrate to the US. They are family-based options, business-based options, or humanitarian options. So, really quick, family-based options are when a family member petitions for you. So, it could be a spouse, could be a parent, even a child in some circumstances. So family-based options are quite common, and there are a number of pretty good options out there if you're an immediate relative. But in contrast, if your sibling is trying to petition for you, the wait time is horrible. It could be 15, 20 years, depending what country you're from. The second main way to immigrate to the US is where a business or employer petitions for you, if you're the intending immigrant, or you could be an investor. You could start up a business and get, for example, an E2 visa or invest a lot of money with an EB5 visa. Finally, humanitarian options include applying for asylum or uniting for Ukraine, or in that category, a U visa if you're a victim or a survivor of a crime. So those are the three main ways to make it happen. A fourth option is the diversity visa. There's often no harm in trying for that, but in some cases it can make applying for other benefits potentially tricky. Good question. Now, a related question to that, what is the difference between a temporary and a permanent visa? So there are permanent options to immigrate, and that's often known and understood as an immigrant visa versus a non-immigrant visa. So if you are truly immigrating to the US, that means you're becoming a permanent resident. So this can be a little fuzzy and confusing. If you come as a student, maybe your family might have thought that you've immigrated there, you've been there for years, but you're not yet a permanent resident. So a true immigrant visa is when you end up becoming a permanent resident. Or if you adjust status in the US, you get a green card, that means you're a permanent resident. So the type of visa, whether it's temporary or permanent, a non-immigrant visa versus an immigrant visa, that says a lot about the different options. US immigration law is complex. It's known as an alphabet soup of different visa options. So one way to help break them apart is some are permanent, some are temporary, non-immigrant versus immigrant visas. Great questions. Thank you. Now, a more tactical, practical question. Do I need to list parking tickets on my naturalization application? So this is actually kind of tricky because one of the key questions on the N400 naturalization application, it starts off by saying, have you ever been arrested? And there's also language about, have you been charged with a crime? So it sounds very serious, and many of us have never been arrested. But also included in there, they sneak it in almost like a trick. Have you ever, the word cited is there. Have you ever been arrested, cited, or charged? It's essentially that language. And citations are very broad. It includes parking tickets, it includes speeding tickets. And so a way you could get in trouble, and you want to avoid getting in trouble with your N400 naturalization application, is yes, you definitely have to list out all those minor tickets that are not a big deal. You paid them off. However, if you haven't paid them off, that can create problems because that'll show you don't have good moral character, which is necessary to naturalize. And you're just supposed to pay off all the fines. Some states even say if you don't pay this off, you're subject to arrest. Watch out for that. But pay those off, have proof ideally that you've paid them off. But in practice, many interviews I've been at with clients, the officer simply says, okay, you got this parking ticket 2 years ago. Did you pay for it? Did you pay it off? The applicant says yes, and the officer is satisfied. Okay, now, next question. I just saw a question come in too, and I'll answer that at the very end here. Here is a question. I came here illegally and have been married to my wife for 5 years. How can I get a green card? So there's a lot of nuances in there. There are many people who enter the US unlawfully. In fact, our businesses encourage it. Our economy would collapse if we didn't have this type of labor. So it's a complex, politicized, emotional issue in many ways. But if someone came here unlawfully, illegally, and is now married, for example, to a US citizen, that can open some doors. But it doesn't immediately resolve the unlawful presence issue. So for those who crossed in here and are unlawfully admitted, you snuck in, you crossed the border without inspection, you have unlawful presence. A big factor in whether you have green card options or not is if you've had multiple entries into the US. Let's say you just had one entry into the US and it was illegal, you have unlawful presence, you married to a US citizen, there's a great option for many of you called the I-601A waiver. It's a provisional waiver. The Obama administration came up with it back in the day, where you can apply for a waiver to get rid of this unlawful presence issue when you're married to a US citizen, and you don't have to leave the United States to get your immigrant visa until your waiver is approved. So that's a major improvement over the old system where you had to apply for a waiver outside the US and it might not get approved. So no one did this. And so both conservatives and liberals didn't like this approach because it just didn't work. So a more commonplace or common sense approach, and it is fairly common these days, is an I-601A waiver that could benefit you now that you're married to a US citizen. The next question, how do I set up an InfoPass appointment? So that's what USCIS calls their in-person meeting at a USCIS field office. And it's been incredibly annoying because you can't set these up online anymore. I believe it was the last administration that just got rid of the online sign up process. And now you have to go through the very tedious approach of calling the 1-800 number and sitting in this horrible Kafka-esque type of environment. You're on hold for a while. You're just stuck suffering, oftentimes for a couple hours. Sometimes you can get through in 30 minutes. And then they won't let everybody immediately set up an InfoPass appointment. You got to talk to a supervisor and then justify why you should be allowed to have an in-person meeting. So it's really pretty outrageous that it's so difficult. And we have several clients who have important reasons to get InfoPass appointments set up, and they're on a wait list in various parts of the country. Completely ridiculous. We have had some clients and other lawyers' clients we've known have done this, try a walk-in approach and say, this is an emergency, have proof of what the emergency is, that whether you need a work permit, advance parole to travel quickly, you might get some results there because a sympathetic USCIS officer knows that it's really difficult to get through, but you need proof of the real emergency. Otherwise, everyone else has to set up an InfoPass appointment to get the in-person meeting, to get a stamp in your passport, or to get EAD updated, or whatever it might be. Okay, question from someone who just submitted this question. What are other immigration documents if you don't have a birth certificate? Okay, so I think you're probably asking what could prove, for example, you're a US citizen, or maybe if you are not a US citizen, whatever country you're a citizen of, you could, for example, provide a CRBA, Consular Report of Birth Abroad, CRBA, if you were born outside the US. Now, but you might be wondering, I just don't have a birth certificate. I need to prove I'm a US citizen. That can get tricky. And then you're going to want, ideally, to apply for a certificate of citizenship, N600, and show that even though you don't have a birth certificate, maybe you were born in a place, many parts of the southern US, you were born with the help of a midwife, not in a hospital. And so you didn't have that standard step taken for you where the hospital issues you a birth certificate. You're going to have to gather other evidence, can be kind of an ad hoc process proof that you lived in the US, school records, medical records, and then get yourself that N600 certificate of citizenship. Okay, I'll stop there. Thanks for tuning in. Pleasure to connect. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.